So for today's video, we're going to be talking about basic concepts and properties of algebra. And we have basically three specific properties that we're going to look at. One is the commutative property. We have another one which is the associative property. And then the last one is the distributive property. We're going to be looking at the commutative property of addition, the commutative property of multiplication, the associative property of addition, the associative property of multiplication, and then lastly the distributive property, which is technically a combination of both of them. It's both multiplication and addition, but we just call it the distributive property. So we'll start off with the first one, which is the commutative property. And the commutative property goes like this. Suppose we have two numbers, a and b. So we have a and b. And we're going to assume that these are real numbers. So we would say exists in the real number set. You don't need to understand this entirely, but basically this backwards E stands for exists. Okay. And then this weird looking R stands for the real number set. You don't need to understand that, but we're just going to assume that these two numbers, a and b, are real numbers. Then the commutative property says these two things. One, that when we add the two numbers together, a plus b, that is the same as when you add b plus a. And then additionally, if we were to multiply the two numbers together, a times b, that is the same as b times a. Sounds pretty simple, right? I'm going to give you a really quick, simple demo. Suppose we have two numbers, let's say 4 and 5. Then we know that 4 plus 5 is the same as 5 plus 4, right? They both equal 9. Additionally, 4 times 5 is the same as 5 times 4. This property works for any real numbers. But that's the first property we're going to be working with. The next property is the associative property, which can be kind of similar. So we have the associative property. And the associative property says something similar in that, suppose in this case I have three numbers, a, b, and c. And these are also real numbers. Then I have the following here. A plus b in parentheses, and then adding c is the same as a plus b plus c in parentheses. So notice that with the associative property, the parentheses moved. At the beginning, they were adding a and b, and then on the other side, now they're adding b and c. Additionally, the same is true when you're multiplying. We have a times b times c is equal to a times b times c. And another simple example is, suppose we have 4 plus 5 plus 6. That is the same as 4 plus 5 plus 6, where 5 and 6 are now in parentheses. And obviously, if we were to add them together, they would both come out to be 15. And if we were to multiply them, it would be similar. 4 times 5, in parentheses, times 6 is the same as 4 times 5 times 6, where 5 and 6 are in parentheses. The last property we'll talk about in this video is the distributive property. In the next video, we'll go over a few examples that actually use all of these properties. And these properties underpin most of algebra, so they're very important to know. The last property we'll talk about is the distributive property. Okay. So the distributive property says something like this. Suppose we have three numbers, A, B, and C, that exist in the real number set, so they can be a real number. They could be a decimal, a whole number, a fraction. They could be negative. They can be a real number. Okay? They could even be pi, or an irrational number. Rational, irrational number. As long as they're not imaginary, that's the one thing they can't be. Then, for the distributive property, we have this. A times B plus C, in parentheses, is the same as A times B plus A times C. Okay? This is a very important property to know because you use it quite a bit, especially in Algebra 1, in Algebra 2. You'll use it in pre-calculus, and even all the way into calculus and beyond. It's a formulative property. So I'll give you a very quick example. So suppose we have 3 times 4 plus 5. We can then use the property to say that this is now 3 times 4 plus 3 times 5. Okay? And then obviously this comes to 12 plus 15 and gets you to 27. One other basic math concept, and this one I think is pretty simple, I'll just add it at the very end here, is combining like terms. Suppose now we have a variable x. So if x is a variable, which means it can be basically any number, but I just don't know what that number is, then I can combine like terms. Suppose I have 4x plus 11x. 4x plus 11x, this is effectively 4 little x's plus 11x's over here. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I can then add them all up and get 15 x's. Okay. And that'll do it for this video. In the next video, we are going to have examples of using these properties. And I think this will be very good for you to understand, because going into the later videos that we have, we're just going to be using these properties as if you already knew them. Well, I'm not going to call them out. I'm not going to say, oh, by using the associative property or by using the commutative property, we can do X or Y. I'm just going to assume that you already know them. Okay, that'll do it for this video.